we're back. Chief, I know the pandemic has caused changes for every man, woman, and child in the world. Your tribe is no exception to that. You guys have had to put some things on the back burner.
We have. I took office in August, and our deputy chief and I, Brian Warner, and my administration and our council, we've been working together on a lot of initiatives. Some of it is saving the language, stuff that's very time sensitive, seating our member of Congress, member of the House for the first time, Kim Teehee, some job training initiatives that were really taking off just as the year began. Those sorts of things just have to go on the back burner, but time marches on, and it's really important that we get those back. So one of the things I'm excited about is getting back on track with those things. I can tell you this, having dealt with the federal government in the past month concerning these federal dollars to help the Cherokee Nation get a lifeline to restore our economy and try to make us whole, I am more convinced than ever that we need even more champions in Congress. And so that's why we need to get Kim Teehee seated. And so that's something that I need to get back to work on that's frankly just been put aside while we dealt with this.
Let's take a look, if we could, just for a moment, because there might be some folk out there not really familiar with what you're talking about when you talk about the language program. Could you help explain that for us?
So we've been making efforts on the language for long before I took office, decades and decades. But right now we have about 3,000 fluent Cherokee speakers left in the Cherokee Nation, first language fluent speakers. If you look at their age, they're all over the age of 50. I mean, I say all, the majority are. And so the demographics are working against us. Time is working against us. Every one of us that take office at the Cherokee Nation take an interesting constitutional oath, not only to uphold the laws of the Cherokee Nation, the Constitution, but to do everything in our power to promote the culture and heritage and protect that. And so part of my oath is to make sure we do that. So what we did is we took millions of dollars from our gaming revenue and we put it into the language so we could expand some programs we have. We've got programs for little kids, our immersion program where kindergarten through sixth grade, you're just speaking Cherokee while you're learning. And then we have essentially the same type of program for adults, small program that's getting much bigger thanks to those dollars. And they spend 2 years, Sam, learning Cherokee by speaking it as a full-time job because it's a complicated language and it takes that kind of commitment. And then we're working on other projects so that we can do what basically is the demand side of that equation. You gotta get the supply right. You gotta get the supply of speakers, but you also have to have something for them to do with the language. That's how a language thrives, and how a language dies is if you don't have anything to do with it. So we're working on some things in developing cartoons for kids, other types of media. So those things are all in the works thanks to the revenue we're able to put back into something very precious, which is our language. Now, look, a generation from now, when people have forgot who Chief Hoskin was, they'll know whether we have the language or not. They'll know that. And I want them to know that we have it. And I want them to know that it's still alive.
I had not thought of that, but the ability to speak, to converse in Cherokee, you've got to have a reason to. You've got to be able to use it somewhere. It had never occurred to me that it is a desperately needed element.
Exactly. So we'll have opportunities to do language classes in the community. A lot of schools in Oklahoma are clamoring for language programs. It's interesting. A few generations ago, public schools in Oklahoma not only weren't interested in that, they actually discouraged the speaking of Cherokee language. Many school districts did. Today, the opposite is true. Today, there's a hunger for it, not only among the Cherokee students, but all students. And so we hope we're able to help provide that resource when we get this pipeline of fluent speakers out there. That's how we're going to keep this language alive.
Well, let's turn to healthcare for just a moment. Did the pandemic dent the healthcare efforts or growth in the nation?
Well, it put a couple of things on hold that are very important to healthcare. One is the expansion of the health center we have in Stillwell, and that's the Wilma P. Mankiller Health Center, named after the great Chief Wilma Mankiller, of course. We needed to increase the size of that facility. I believe we're near doubling the size of that so that we can take on the demand that's in that area. That was a construction project that was just begun when the pandemic hit, so we had to put that to the side, not only for the safety of the construction workers, but frankly, from a fiscal standpoint, to make sure the money was is there. Here's the other thing. We had the first medical school, still have it in Indian country, that starts in the fall, Oklahoma State University Medical School at Cherokee Nation. This is historic. This is something that's going to help solve a problem that we have not only in Cherokee Nation, but all of rural Oklahoma, which is how do you get a supply of doctors to take on the demand that is there, particularly in these small communities? Well, one way to do it is to educate them in a small community. And if you can educate them in a small community that's also the capital of a great Indian nation, I think what that means is you'll have a point in which you can inspire young Cherokees to be the doctors of tomorrow. That project actually had to be paused because of health and safety reasons. We're bringing that back on. It's going to slow the opening of the brick and mortar. It's not going to slow the opening of the school. We'll have another plan for that. But those were two big initiatives that just had to be put aside because of this pandemic. But, our healthcare workforce and leadership was on the front lines of this pandemic. So we just put all of our efforts into that.
Well, is it safe to say that somewhere in that mix, one could expect to see a Cherokee Law School evolve?
Well, it's possible. Medical school, healthcare, that's the priority of this time. I can tell you that we need Cherokees, young Cherokees coming up to take on all of these jobs, not the least of which is our jobs in the legal profession. I mean, when you're talking about Cherokee Nation, you're talking about an entity that's also has a business of thousands of employees in lots of different business sectors. So, there was a time when you think, what is somebody who's a Cherokee that wants to be a lawyer? Are they going to be an Indian lawyer? We need corporate lawyers. We need tax lawyers. We need all sorts of lawyers to take on those challenges. And then, of course, the issues dealing with sovereignty, whether it's asserting that treaty right that's 180 years old that we're asserting to seat Kim Teehee in Congress, or whether it's addressing water rights, land and trust issues. We need young people to come up and take on those legal jobs, too. So it's possible someday. Our focus right now, though, is healthcare, because there is such a need for providers, not only in Cherokee Nation's health system, but also all over rural Oklahoma. What's the main roadblock to Teehee being seated? It's really an issue, I think, a political issue, and I don't mean that in any sort of a dismissive way. It's just this is a decision the United States House of Representatives has to make, and for the U.S. House of Representatives to make a decision, you got to prod them along. Now, we've had good response from our congressional delegation, and that's good. That includes Congressman Markwayne Mullen, includes Congressman Cole. We've had conversations with the senators as well. And so we've got to get the House, though, to seat her. One way they can seat her is to change the rules, to actually say in their rules that they will seat a delegate pursuant to this treaty. You can imagine, though, that if it's a 180-year-old treaty that few people have talked about except until about last August when we brought it up, there's a great deal of education to do. Mm-hmm. We were well on our way, Sam, to getting members of Congress to understand this issue, make a compelling case for it, answer questions that they had about it when the pandemic hit. And things like travel to D.C., you really have to be face-to-face with some of these members, like we were with the Speaker of the House last fall, Nancy Pelosi. We've got to have those sorts of conversations to get her seated. It's really, in terms of the obstacles, it's education, and it's moving it politically for that body to say she should be seated. Everybody should be well aware that the tribe has lost a great deal of money because of the pandemic. Right. With the casinos being closed, there was nothing coming in. And yet, if I understand it correctly, the people who worked for the casinos were taken care of, were they not? They were. So when we made the decision back on March the 16th to close down all of our public-facing businesses and really send even the folks in the back office home, that decision meant that nearly 4,000 men and women, most of whom are Cherokees, had to go home, and yet could we still pay them? Fortunately, we were in a strong position with our business, as we are in our government, in terms of finances, and it's something that's taken decades of really prudent decision-making to get us in that position. Sure. We pay them all. So I'm proud to say that through this whole pandemic, whether it's our government side or our business side, there's not a single employee that has gone without pay during this whole time. And I think that's remarkable. I think it's a great reflection on the strength of the Cherokee Nation. Makes me proud of our leadership now and that's those that came before us. But that's good, because here's the thing. Had we not been able to do that, you can imagine the pressure of thousands and thousands of workers suddenly put into the unemployment line, because remember, it took Congress a little while to boost those unemployment benefits or put on the social safety net of the state.
Sure.
We saved this economy in a way that I think most people won't understand, because you don't know what didn't happen. And had it happened, had thousands been out of work, would have been in much worse shape. But so I'm proud we did our part as a responsible employer, also responsible to the health and safety of our workers and the public, because the reason we shut that down, as we all know, is to protect people's health.
Gotcha. It's remarkable is an understatement, by the way. I think it's absolutely more than that. I want to turn to our remaining time to discuss this flap out of the governor's office. I'm in reading the dispute. To me, it's very clear. I don't have any trouble understanding what I read, but then I don't always speak legalese, and I'm certainly not going to play a partisan game. But when you've got all of the tribes saying, whoa, wait a minute, that's not what we signed on for. And now it's headed, I think, to, it's in a lawsuit. A judge is going to make a final determination. Any projections on that?
Well, I think we'll win, because, you don't have to be a lawyer to read that section of the compact that talked about it renewing. And that's the legal issue, is whether it renewed or not. You really just have to understand what a basic sentence means, and you have to understand that a comma is not a period. And after the comma, there was a part that talked about why it would renew and what the circumstances were. They're fairly straightforward.
Like it was an automatic thing.
It was an automatic thing. So, but here's the frustrating part, Sam. It was frustrating enough last fall to take office as I did as principal chief, or the end of the summer, going into the fall, and to see this happen, to see the governor of the state of Oklahoma really, I think, erode the great relationship that the governor's office and the tribes have had through this unnecessary dispute. But there's been another dispute since then. So in the midst of trying to hash out this lawsuit, as parties in civil litigation have to do, the governor signs compacts with two tribes that are illegal. And people don't have to take the chief of the Cherokee Nation's opinion for it. They could ask the Speaker of the House of Representatives. They could ask the President pro tem, or they could ask the Attorney General of the state of Oklahoma, all of whom said this is illegal. And at some point, as a leader, I think you have to look around and respect the opinion of people who know what they're talking about, who are in a position, as the Attorney General is, to issue an opinion that's the law of the land in the state, and you have to defer to that. And the governor of the state of Oklahoma did not do that. And so now we're in a position where these compacts, which are legally infirm for a variety of reasons, are now in front of the federal agency that has to approve it. And there may be further litigation, because we can't stand aside while the governor of the state of Oklahoma continues to create phony crisis after phony crisis and do nothing about it. I mean, we owe it to the people we represent, frankly, to all 4 million Oklahomans, to get this thing resolved. And we can resolve it if we would sit down and talk serious about the future of gaming in the state of Oklahoma.
Well, it took, 7 or 8 years just to get a decision on a real ID out of Oklahoma. So good luck. But I got to tell you, when this flaps first started, I thought, now, wait a minute here. Hold on. And then, as you said, the Speaker stepped in, and then the Attorney General. And once the Attorney General stepped in, I don't know why, it occurred to me I could almost hear the bugler from the 7th Cavalry, saying, I think we better leave. We better back off.
Right.
And I just, for the life of me, couldn't figure out why he's doing it. Where is he getting his advice?
I don't know where he's getting his advice. He's not getting it from the leaders of his own party. He's not getting it from the top legal authority in the state outside of the courts, which is the Attorney General. I don't know where he's getting it from, but he's getting bad advice. And the terrible thing is, Sam, is this bad advice is actually costly to the people of the state of Oklahoma, all 4 million Oklahomans, because he's caused disruption, I think, in the gaming industry in the state, which has been so good to this state, so good for this state in terms of employing thousands of people, generating so much economic development, and paying money directly to the state for things like education. And look, Sam, the last time I looked at the state's budget, it looks like they're in trouble. And they're in trouble because of the pandemic, but they need every penny they can get for things like public education. We are there to provide part of that. It's tough to do, though, when phony crisis after phony crisis is imposed on tribes that were here before there was a state of Oklahoma, but are great partners with the state of Oklahoma. I think we need to be treated like the friends that we are, and we sure haven't been.
I would agree with you on that. And, there are a lot of folks out there right now upset at the concept of taxpayer dollars going to private entities like private schools.
Right.
Now, I don't know what that was all about, but that's out of my league.
Well, that's another head scratcher because, look, I go into these public schools across northeast Oklahoma. I see what some of these teachers and superintendents are up against. They're not awash in money. In fact, we spent 10 years in this state whittling away at public education. Of course, the gaming dollars went up. Other dollars went down. It seems to me we need to be in a growth period if we're serious about being a top 10 state. There's no top 10 state that I know of that cuts education the way we have. We need to do the opposite of what we've been doing.
I saw it's been almost a year ago, I think, when George Kaiser had a letter to the editor of the Tulsa World telling the state, essentially, in a kind way, fellas, it's very simple. Here's what you need to do in terms of drilling for oil, in terms of, oil money, energy money, fossil fuel money. And he said, I know the concern is going to be, well, they won't come here anymore. They won't drill in Oklahoma anymore. And his bottom line was, they'll go where the oil is. And yet nothing has been done in that regard. I don't understand when a good suggestion is put forward by someone who's very successful, which would yield incredible benefits for the state of Oklahoma, why they don't take it and say thank you and run with the ball.
Well, that's a good point. And I can tell you who else has been successful. Just about every tribe in this state. We've successful, and we've essentially handed the state good ideas in terms of keeping the gaming industry moving in the right direction. And the leadership from the governor's office is wrecking that. And here's the other thing, Sam. Years from now, when I'm out of office, Governor Stitt's out of office, there's going to be a governor of the state of Oklahoma. There's going to be a chief of the Cherokee Nation and leaders of all the other tribes. They better have a good relationship because it's in the state's best interest. So my point is the damage being done now is damage we won't just feel now. It's not just two adversaries, because we shouldn't be that. It's what is going to happen in generational terms to this state if the relationship between the tribes and the state goes south even further. That's the way it's headed. But the governor can change all of it.
The late Angie DeVoe was a friend of mine, and I would love to get her pick up on this, get her opinion on, Miss Angie, what about this? What do you think about this? Miss Angie, tell me what you think about the governor's move here, dealing with the Indian tribe, because she would have a rock solid opinion based on fact.
And she wouldn't be shy about it.
No, she wouldn't. Hey, I want to thank you for dropping by. We got about 30 seconds. Anything you want to plug in that 30 seconds?
Well, I'm proud of Cherokee Nation. Look, we open our offices, our government offices next week. We're going to do it in a slow way. We're going to protect the workforce. And at Cherokee Nation, to get into our buildings, you have to wear a mask. That goes for staff. That goes for citizens. It's to protect people. We're using medical science at the Cherokee Nation to decide how to make our moves. Our casinos will be open. We'll be doing them safe. They'll be in a slower phased opening. The Cherokee Nation is strong. I think we're showing the state and all governments how to operate.
Cheek, we're out of time, Steve. Thank you so much, and we're grateful to you for it.
Sam.
We'll talk again down the road. That's all the time we have, folks. Thank you for being a part of it. For now, good night and good luck.